you kind of get on that hamster wheel where you're kind of chasing the dragon, right? You feel like you need that coffee because it makes you feel a little bit fabulous or feel a little bit extra special that day. Are you really getting value from these purchases? If your best purchase every week is 2 or 3 lattes at Starbucks, have at it.
How important is that sip of coffee in your journey to becoming debt-free? Well, the debt-free guys, David and John, join me in this latest episode of Coffee with Katherine to discuss the need for inclusion in personal finance, the steps that you can take to become debt-free, and what the media needs to do to be more inclusive. First of all, guys, I just want to introduce you to our audience, and I kind of want to hear your story. I mean, how did you start debt-free, guys? Let's start there.
Sure.
With a lot of debt.
With a lot of debt. So about 1.5 years after David and I got together, we finally came out to each other about our financial situation. And we realized that between the two of us, we had $51,000 in credit card debt. The irony at the time was that we had about 15 years of combined tenure in financial services. So we were helping other people. We knew better theoretically, but we weren't practicing it in our own lives. And we basically came up with a strategy and a plan to pay off that debt. We were able to do that in about 2.5 years. And toward the end of paying off our debt, we thought, well, now we have both our personal and our professional experience with credit card debt and paying it off fast. We thought we could share this with other people. And that's really where Debt-Free Guys germinated from. And then it was about 1.5 years to 2 years later that we decided to tack a little bit and not speak so broadly to the general population, but to speak more towards the LGBTQ community, because we realized in starting Debt-Free Guys that there were a lot of people in our community who had similar challenges that we did.
So when it comes to, I mean, just the fact that you guys theoretically knew better, I think that is something that a lot of Americans face. We all know better. We all know not to overspend or buy that TV that we really want to buy. But I feel like impulse buying in the age of Instagram and the age of online shopping in general is just so much more tempting than it ever has been before. Do you agree with that?
Definitely. I think that the point that you're kind of bringing to light here is the difference between values and standards. We all value great things in life, right? We value honesty. We value a financially successful life, or at least financial stability in our lives. But our standards are oftentimes the lowest common denominator of what we allow for ourselves. So we allow ourselves to spend that extra $20 at dinner, that extra $50 a month on clothing, or we allow ourselves the extra self-care type of spending that oftentimes lands us in debt or lands us in a financial situation that ends up wreaking havoc on our finances and on our mental health sometimes.
I'm glad that you brought up the self-care, because I do think that self-care in general, I mean, I'm pretty sure all three of us can agree that self-care is incredibly important. But when you think about the pandemic, we've seen spending go up. We do know that people, because of stimulus checks and whatnot, have felt kind of a cushion for their finances. But it also makes me wonder if we're going to see a little bit more of credit card debt rise in the next 6 to 8 months because of the pandemic. And because, you at the end of the day, you're thinking, well, I'm stuck at home and I really want a new chair, or I really want a new laptop. Why not just buy it now?
We typically see an increase in credit card usage and in credit card debt when the economy improves. And I think we're starting to see that now. What I think is super unique right now, though, is I think that post-COVID, a lot of Americans are rethinking their values, and they're rethinking their standards, and they're rethinking whether or not they want to go back to business as usual. And as we're seeing with the 20-year break in quits rates, I think people are questioning all that. And so we're hoping that somehow parlays into how people use credit cards and how they use their money altogether.
Let's dig a little bit into the fact that you guys started this to reach out to the LGBTQ community, because if we're being frank, it's not a community that is really represented in the large financial services industry. How important is it to have people who can focus specifically on this community?
Absolutely. I think that historically, LGBT folks have been left out of a lot of the discussions, whether it's representation in marketing materials. John and I, when we worked in financial services, went on a 2-year campaign trying to get the company we worked for to start representation in marketing materials because advisors were asking for it, and the company still said no. So there's always been a struggle, I think, for representation. But beyond that, I think that there's been a struggle with how do the finances of queer folks, how are they different than the general population? And how do we figure out those nuances and serve those nuances? And I think a lot of companies are scared to do that, or hesitant to do that, or just downright don't want to do that.
And when it comes to Pride, I mean, when we're taping this, it is June still. It's the last day of June for any of you watching. And I'm a bisexual woman. You guys are 2 gay men. One thing that really stands out to me and almost kind of angers me at times as more than just a journalist is looking at all these companies change their logos to be Pride colors and then not seeing actions behind the changes in logos.
Pinkwashing, I think, is what a lot of folks are calling it, or rainbow capitalism is another term. And it does get a little frustrating where you see companies out there making efforts to show that they want to support the community, but they only do it in the month of June. The reality is, for our business, because we do focus on the LGBT community, we get a lot of businesses reaching out to us in May and June, but then July through April, it's crickets, because they want to show representation during that time of the month or time of the year. But I think that there are some companies out there doing a great job where their representation is so much more than a rainbow logo. They are doing things like supporting the organizations that many queer folk rely on for healthcare or mental health services, or just a community space. There's lots of organizations that are doing that. The Trevor Project is an example of a company that, or of an organization that wouldn't exist without corporate donations. So I think there's some companies doing a great job, but I think that there's a lot of companies that have hopped on the bandwagon because they think it's the right thing to do, but they don't want to do anything further.
If a company notices that they're participating in rainbow capitalism and the executive branch wants to actually put actions behind those words, behind the changes behind the words, what would be your first advice for any CEO looking to actually incorporate action?
Our number one piece of advice would be to most organizations, most of these Fortune 500 companies have an employee or a business resource group. A great way to authentically engage in the community, whether it's the African American community, the Latinx community, or the LGBTQ community, is to connect with those folks, find out from them what they know about their community, what they think authentic engagement with our community would be, and then use that to build your marketing and services program.
I'll add that a lot of these organizations, they want to be supportive, but then they turn to the typical organizations that they've used, right? So they may use their existing PR company. They may use this existing company that prints their T-shirts. They may use existing companies that they have a relationship with. Queer businesses struggle because of representation in the business world as well. And so when you want to support the LGBT community, just like there was this push to engage with African American owned businesses in the last year or two, the same thing can happen at the corporate level. Find queer owned businesses. The NGLCC is the largest organization that represents LGBT owned businesses in the United States, and they have a whole host of organizations that you can tap into to try to show that you're actually putting your money where your mouth is, or where your rainbow is at, right? You're actually using the dollars to actually help LGBT folks who are trying to start or starting businesses, and they need that kind of financial support as well.
I'm curious because I've covered a lot with Elvest and Sally Krawcheck, the CEO there, specifically on women's finances. So I want to open the discussion up to LGBTQ investing. Do you guys see how can okay, how can I, as a financial journalist, better reach that audience and better inform them with financial literacy tips for investing specifically?
I think that that there is still a bridge that needs to be built between the LGBT community and the financial media. I think that there's still a lot of efforts being put out there, but I think that it's not a place where a lot of LGBT folks naturally go to. They're not heading to the typical large financial media corporations' websites or television shows or YouTube channels. It's not happening there yet. So I think that there needs to be some sort of attraction, right? Who from the LGBT community can help represent or attract more people to those places? And this is where we may need to start thinking outside of the box do we need just a typical traditional journalist to take the approach? Maybe it is reaching out to strong individuals in the LGBT community who have a voice to say, this is an important thing for us to talk about, whether it's individuals in the drag community, which is very popular, or in the advocacy community. Those folks understand that how to interact with the community, and they can bring folks along. So it may look a little different. It may not be just an article or a clip on a 30-minute show that's about LGBT folks. It may need to be something that's a little bit more engaging and attracts the audience.
I think a big challenge that David and I have, as well as the financial services industry and financial media have, is that a lot of LGBTQ folks we don't see ourselves represented in the media. We don't see ourselves represented in marketing and collateral. And so we don't think that that type of financial security or financial success is available to us. It seems like it's for lack of a better word, the stale, male, and pale audience. It's not necessarily for me, so I'm not likely to engage with that. So I think it's reaching out authentically to the LGBTQ community, whether that's connecting with influencers in the LGBTQ entertainment space and trying to bridge that divide, as David said, or actually going to the LGBTQ centers around the country and trying to connect with people where they're at and starting to build those bridges.
And I really appreciate the honesty that you guys have there, because I don't want to make you do extra work, of course, but I do think that it's important for all of us to be more aware of the power that we hold, whether it's on screen, whether it's what we're writing. It's so key you have to be keyed in. And with that, I want to get more towards managing our finances, because when you say I'm managing my finances, that's such a broad thing to state. Where do you start?
This is one of our favorite questions to get because it's a fun answer. Even before birth, people are projecting onto us what our best life is supposed to look like, right? Your mom and dad have this dream of where you're going to go to college and what your career is going to be. And depending upon your gender, they might think that you're going to be going into football or cheerleading or soccer or whatever. And they're all that before you're born. And so by the time we're adults, 18, 21, 25 years old, we don't really know what our best life would look like because we've been conditioned all of those years to live up to everyone else's expectations. So we'd like to encourage people to sit down and think about what are your truest, deepest hopes and dreams. If you could dismiss anything anybody has ever told you of what the ideal life looked like, whether that was your parents or whether that's actually the LGBTQ community, what does your best life look like? Figure out what that is. Those 1, 2, or 3 things that you really want to achieve, that you want to accomplish, and then back into it from there. How do you then make those dreams a reality? Very often there's a financial component to it, and these bigger dreams require small steps repeated over time to actually achieve. So figure out what those big goals are and then back into that success.
And what about if I want to start investing? With tools such as Robinhood, public.com, we've got so many ways to just start throwing our money into the stock market. What kind of steps do you guys suggest taking?
I definitely think it's important for folks to get some education first. That's part of the reason why we have the Queer Money podcast, is that there's a general understanding and knowledge about investing, I think, passed down in families, but a lot of queer folks, especially young folks, they're not necessarily getting that from their family, and they're oftentimes distracted by a whole host of other issues. So I think for a lot of queer folks, it's kind of investing 101 is where we really need to start. The simple, easy to use tools are probably the best place to start. And that's where we oftentimes encourage folks to start. Where are the tools that will allow you to automatically invest, that allow you to scrape away some of your change? Or how do you pull $25 a month or a paycheck out of your paycheck and send that to a company that will create a portfolio that's easy for you to understand? As you start to grow your balances, as you start to get your assets start to grow, you're going to want to grow your knowledge as well, because then you can start to make informed decisions that will empower you to grow even faster and further. And that's when it may be important to start tapping into financial advisors, or there are folks in the LGBT community in the personal finance space that are talking about investing, where you can get some specific knowledge, learn more from them, and get the help that you need to grow faster.
We have noticed that even though the LGBTQ community isn't necessarily engaged with the major financial media, they do seem to hear the sexy things that go on, such as GameStop and Robinhood and cryptocurrency and NFTs. And so we always try to caution them people to not try to gravitate to the headliners and what looks so sexy today. We're more of a boring investors. We like our index ETFs and index mutual funds. That's predominantly where we suggest people to hold their assets. And then if they have a little bit of money that they want to play with, only with the amount that you're willing to lose would we suggest going into individual stocks or any of those other interesting investments that make the media these days.
Well, I mean, that sounds... It's been one of the biggest struggles as a journalist to cover the GMEs, the AMCs, and to do it in a way that doesn't alienate the younger investor, because I do think that there's importance of bringing them in, but also educate, as you guys said, because it's hard to avoid when Dogecoin's up 50 cents and all of your friends are buying. I mean, you want to jump in too. It's the FOMO effect.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, we run that risk sometimes too.
It's interesting that you bring the FOMO into it. And I think that this is the opportunity that maybe a lot of young people, maybe people, especially in the queer community, or young African American or Latino kids who aren't familiar with investing. There's this hype that's going on right now. So this is the opportunity for them to start to get some education that maybe their family, their parents wouldn't normally pass down to them or even know themselves. So it's time to educate, but exercise caution as well.
I want to circle back to something that you guys said at the very beginning, which is how you guys racked up credit card debt. And the reason that I want to circle back is because I think that it's so easy to do. It's probably the number one easiest debt. I mean, that's just something that I'm throwing out, but definitely among my friends, that's what I hear about: student loans, credit cards. So how do you figure out what credit cards to pick out before you even start spending?
So we like to tell people that using credit cards is like swimming in the deep end. If you don't know how to swim, don't go in the deep end. Stay in the shallow end. So try to avoid using credit cards at all if you don't understand how to use them, or you're not financially mature ready at this point in your life to use them. At that point, if you decide that you are mature enough or you are financially ready to start using credit cards, we're all for credit card hacking. Try to figure out how you can 10x your life by choosing the right credit cards for you. So if you like to travel, as we do, use your find credit cards that offer great rewards in that way. If you're looking for cash back or you're looking for discounts on local restaurants in your area, figure out how to find credit cards that meet those needs. But only do so if you feel like you're ready enough to be able to use those credit cards to the point where you can pay those credit card balances off month after month. Beyond that, if you're not looking for anything specific, then we always suggest looking for the credit cards that offer the lowest interest rates at that particular time.
I'll add, we talked about FOMO and the sexy, and I think a lot of people are lured into credit cards because of the rewards. They think that the rewards are going to grant them this amazing life, but it's oftentimes important to remember those rewards are being paid by someone, and they're not being paid by the credit card company. So that means there's a customer out there that's paying for those rewards. If you are not paying your credit card off every month, you're paying for somebody else's rewards. Why would you want to do that? If you cannot pay your credit card off every month, that means you need to maybe put the training wheels back on and go back to a budget that allows you to stick within a spending guideline that doesn't allow you to use a credit card or allows you to use a credit card in a very limited way. And we can get sucked into that FOMO. There was a recent report that said over 40% of millennials admit that they have spent money they don't have trying to keep up with their friends when it comes to experiences and the things that they own. And I think that a lot of us fall into that. Credit cards is the easy trap for that.
I completely agreed. And I think that one of the underlying issues here is that you have to build a credit score in order to get something such as an apartment. So I'm wondering if you guys say to wait until you're a little bit more mature for a credit card, how do you suggest people build up credit in general then?
So that is a great question. And there are a number of ways to start building your credit as a young person. If you're still at home and you're under your parents' roof and your parents are willing to do this, ask your parents to add you as an authorized signer on their card. It does allow you to start getting some credit history under your Social Security number, under your name. But remember, your parents, that's not a free ride, right? You want to use it wisely. You don't want to ruin their credit as well. But then once you start to get out on your own, there are some things that you can do, or you have a job of your own. There are some things that you can do. Like, for example, if you have a car and you're paying for gas, get a gas station credit card. It has a low balance. You're not going to rack up a lot of debt on that card. It allows you to do something you're spending your money on anyway. If you pay that off every 2 weeks or every month, you're going to quickly build up this history of payments on your card. There are kids who are getting out of high school and they already have 2 or 3 years worth of credit history when they're entering college, which gives them that great opportunity. There are other tools that you can use as well that allow you to build that kind of credit history. Getting your own phone account, right? I know that may mean that you pay a little bit more, but if you have your own phone account, then you're building credit history with that phone account. And so tools like that are opportunities where you can spend money of your own money on your own things does allow you to build some credit history.
What about, there's a lot of closets and a lot of shame when it comes to talking about people in the LGBTQ community. And I hate the closet metaphor, but it makes me wonder, how do you come out to a partner about debt? Because it can be a shameful thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason why David and I didn't have the money conversation until a year and a half until we got together. Both being in financial services, we just assumed that the other one couldn't be nearly as horrible as we were. It was just somewhat serendipitous that we were both in the same boat. Our first tip for people to get the money conversation started and to start maybe disclosing whether or not they have credit card debt is, again, to, as a couple, start to discuss what is it you want to achieve as a couple. Long term, what are your big goals? Where do you want to retire? Where do you want to buy a house? Do you want to have a boat someday? Do you want to travel the world someday? Whatever your goals are, figure out what those big goals are, and then again, start backing into those. At some point in that discussion, then you need to ask yourselves, what is it going to take for us to get there? What might be holding us back at this particular point in time? And hopefully by that point, you've had some intimate conversations with each other that you're both comfortable sharing whatever it is that you have to disclose to each other. And some inspiration for why people might want to have this conversation is that Honeyfi has done a study a couple years in a row that showed that couples who talk about finances report having better sex lives. So if there's no other reason to have that conversation, there might be the number one reason.
I love that stat. Okay, so when we talk about getting debt-free, you guys obviously have experience with it. What are your 3 top tips here?
I think probably the most important one is to understand why you got into debt, which I think kind of breaks down into 2 pieces. There's the emotional aspect. What Oftentimes, debt is a symptom of something else, right? And when I mentioned that statistic about millennials overspending to keep up, oftentimes that's an insecurity issue or a feeling like you're being left out, that you're not good enough unless you do those kinds of things, right? But then the other is the actual tactical. And so one of the first steps that we took, that I did when we wanted to get out of debt, is I laid out all of our spending for a year, every single penny. And we looked at it and we all of a sudden realized that we knew exactly where we were overspending. We knew what our outliers were, and we knew although our lives didn't feel like we were living like rock stars, our credit card and bank statements showed that we were living like rock stars, right? And so it became a little easier for us to say, how can we fix this? Then the next step after that is actually creating that plan. Creating the plan of how you're going to fix that. And for us, it was really reining in those large expenses, because that immediately freed up a lot of cash for us to be able to start putting towards our credit cards. And then the final step is working your plan, because every plan is great to have, but you're going to have to make adjustments along the way. It's never a straight line from here to there. So on a regular basis, whether it's weekly or monthly, get together with your partner or have your own personal finance meeting and say, where am I at? Am I on track? What do I need to do to tack, or how can I speed up? Are there things that are going to be speed bumps in the future that I need to plan for? And that really kind of sets the framework of how you can pay off your credit card debt. That's all something that we have worked hard to share with our community, and that's why we actually have a course. It's our credit card payoff course, and it really walks people through that in a community setting that allows them to not only get the accountability, but actually follow a plan, the actual plan that we used when we paid off our credit card debt.
I think my last question to you guys is actually based on a Susie Orman quote from 2019, where she said, if you waste money on coffee, it's like, and this is a direct quote, peeing $1 million down the drain. Do you guys think that there is room in your budget, especially if you're paying down debt, to buy that iced coffee from Starbucks if you walk past and it's a splurge?
Right there.
In the camera. So we actually had David Bach on our podcast a couple of years ago, and we talked about the Latte Factor. And to us, that's really just a metaphor, in that, you know, it's synonym today might be avocado toast, right? It's just a metaphor of how we might unconsciously spend our money, and it's all that's doing is asking you to become a little bit more aware of how you're spending your money. Because to David's point, when we itemized all of our expenses for an entire year, until we looked at how and where we were spending our money, we didn't know how large we were living. We couldn't have explained to you how we had so much credit card debt. And then when we saw how we were spending, you know, admittedly, we spent a lot of money on wine, dining out, and expensive clothing. Well, we had to ask ourselves, were these expenses really fueling our soul? Were they really providing the value that we were led to believe that they were providing, or that marketing was telling us that it was providing? And ultimately it wasn't. And then you kind of get on that hamster wheel where you're kind of chasing the dragon, right? You feel like you need that coffee because it makes you feel a little bit fabulous or feel a little bit extra special that day. So you have to do it the next day and the next day. And so to us, it's really just a metaphor of, are you really getting value from these purchases? If your best purchase every week is 2 or 3 lattes at Starbucks, have at it. Live your best life. But then understand that you're going to be having to give things up in other areas of your life. If you would much rather be secure for retirement, know that you don't have to go into an institution when you get too old and your family is done with you, then you might want to plan a little bit more strategically, and that might say, I should forego this latte at least 1 or 2 days a week instead of 5 days a week.
Thank you guys for joining us today. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate everything that you brought, from teaching the media how to be better about representation, to discussing how to pay down debt, to coming out to your partner about your debt. I think this has been an incredibly informative episode. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and we want to especially thank you for giving us an opportunity to share our message, because it is hard to reach the masses, and it's only because of people like you willing to take the risk and maybe disrupt some of your traditional audience that we can actually do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.